Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Wacky War Tactics in yet another nutshell by BlueJay. Now this is part 3 in his Wacky War Tactics series. We've already seen some pretty strange strategies used in warfare throughout human history, and today we'll get a look at more of those. Now if you guys end up enjoying this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction. Oh, Gallipoli. Uh-oh.
Hey there, champ. How's it going? Not great. We're in an active war zone, if you couldn't tell. Tell me about it. These Uber delivery fees are basically war crimes, and I would know. Say, do you guys have Qdoba yet? Oh, I don't have time for this. I gotta get out of here before the Australians finish me off. What are you talking about? There's no one over there. What? Then who shot me? Oh, that? That would be a can of piss. What? It's late 1915. Huh? World War I is ramping up.
Damn, Gallipoli was bad enough. I guess I'm about to learn some more weird facts about it.
Intensity, and Anzac forces are not feeling the whole great part of the Great War.
Yeah.
80,000 of them are cornered in Gallipoli, the Ottomans ready to finish them officially, and their only hope to survive was to evacuate expeditiously. But
yeah, the Aussies and New Zealanders, or I should say the Aussies and Kiwis, really got messed up in this whole situation. They were done pretty dirty. Goddamn Churchill!
There was one glaring issue with the retreat. If the Ottomans were to notice, it was predicted they would send up to 30,000 men from the land down under to the land down 6 feet under. So they came up with a nifty plan to pull off this miracle evacuation. What if they retreated by not doing so? Or more specifically, convince the Ottomans that they were still having a grand old time playing in their trenches, almost actually scurrying to their comfy metal floats. To help pull off this ghost army masquerade was the wondrous drip rifle. Not that kind. Essentially working from home, but without the Clash of Clans in your underwear part, a drip rifle was a gun that was rigged with a delayed firing mechanism consisting of 2 cans and a bit of string. The top can would be filled with water and slowly drip into the bottom one until Isaac Newton took the wheel and pulled the trigger with a nerd magic of gravity. However, given the fact that fresh water was rather scarce for Anzacs in Gallipoli, there's a non-zero chance that some of these cans were given the old golden shower treatment to operate, making it undoubtedly some of the finest work ever graced by Australian hands, other than yours truly. Therefore, after the rear guard set up a bunch of these with dummies and smoked a platoon's worth of cigarettes each to make the trenches appear full of men, or trains, they were able to safely evacuate with remote gunfire masking their withdrawal from the Ottomans, who were none the wiser. But anyway, that is a Tarantino amount of blood behind you, so one could say you're in for a bad time.
Bruh.
Today we're learning about wacky war tactics, yet again.
So wacky.
I watch you while you sleep. Or at least I could be with the new limited edition BlueJay figure. I just couldn't get my fix of breaking and entering last time, so I barged back into the U2's lab to cook up this dashing little scallywag. Complete with a tricorn hat, bandana, and cannon, this vinyl figure is perfect for all your whimsical pirate needs and definitely does not contain a radio transmitter. It took a few prototypes to get right, finding the right orphan meat is hard after all, but nevertheless, we were able to come up with a stunning swashbuckling BlueJay to honor the channel's pirate phase earlier this year. U2's gave me complete creative input over not only the design of the figure, but the box design itself, meaning every crack, crevice, and vaguely threatening language was strategically crafted by yours truly. I didn't think they'd let me say this. Those wonderful U2 servants really went all out with this one, and it's honestly the second coolest thing I've ever received after your mom's number, but it's only available for a limited time, so if you want to complete your BlueJay U2's jar collection or send me even more videos of you torturing my merchandise, click the link in the description to snag yours before it's gone forever. And now, back to the video. Now, in my last installment, I talked about how the Persians defeated Egypt at Pelusium by using cats, a story with shaky reliability the others rightfully called me out on. That thumbnail was a joke, by the way.
Damn, that's an inflammatory thumbnail. Look, I'll also say, when we're watching these kinds of YouTube videos, sort of pop history about wacky war tactics, or the greatest this, or the best that, take all this with a grain of salt, alright? A lot of these are stories told without much historical backing, right? Sometimes very little evidence, and you gotta remember, just because someone wrote something down doesn't mean it's actually true. We need corroboration, we need to look at the surrounding evidence to see if what we have is accurate. So a lot of the stories being told in these types of videos, they're more entertainment than actual history, right? Always keep that in mind when you're watching these types of YouTube videos.
Since then, I've redoubled my efforts into verifying the accuracy of stories and
Reddit times two, yeah. That probably describes the research process of a lot of YouTubers.
disclosing when their reliability can't be fully determined. Ancient history is always a blurry topic after all, and while this first story takes place around the same time as the Battle of Pelusium, the tale of cat warfare was first reported 700 years after the fact and only comes from a single source.
And I will say, I mean, if you want to talk about these, perhaps, and maybe even probably untrue stories, I think that's fine to do. I think best practice is to say, hey, there's not a lot of strong evidence for this, or just say where you got it from, right? So just tell people, this is probably not true, or perhaps is not true. You can make up your own mind. I'm still going to tell you the story, because then you're communicating to people, this is probably not actually accurate, but that doesn't mean we can't enjoy the story, which may very well be fictional.
Today's story has two. Ancient China, the spring and autumn period, also known as history's first battle royale, with something like 200 states vying for power, including the Qi, or the fancy Qi, or the letter E. When they weren't competing for a name that sounded the most like a Pokemon with brain damage, they spent their time kickstarting many major philosophies, such as Confucianism to guide people on morality, or Taoism to guide hippies on their first tattoos. But above all, these Chinese states enjoyed their art, like war. The Art of War by Sun Tzu is potentially written during this period, a military text made famous for its revolutionary tactical advice like give your soldiers food and think before you move. This priceless
Okay, yes, but hey, to give Sun Tzu some credit, I would say in many ways he set the standard for everything that was to follow, and really what he's doing is sort of providing the basics and some more advanced advice. And frankly, if you look at the history of warfare, you'd be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't be shocked, to see how often people do not follow the basics, right? Now, of course, not all of Sun Tzu's advice is actually applicable in every situation, especially since he was writing in a particular circumstance, a particular environment. Things have changed a lot, but it's worth a read, right? And I think a lot of that advice is still applicable in one way or another, and you can see how it would have been, especially at that time.
knowledge was studied by Helu, the king of Wu, who utilized it along with the legendary man himself to squad up and wage wars, cranking 90s on his neighbors, trying to clutch that dub. And the next stop on his way to a victory royale was his demure neighbor down south.
Bruh.
I did it. But at what cost? Upon hearing of the death of its leader, Helu seized the opportunity to wage war on the state of Yue as it was transitioning to its new king, Goizhan. So with their crosshairs set, the state of Wu prepared for their invasion. Alright boys, before we go, let's just check our little manual here. Food. Make sure to bring food, guys. Genius. Of course. I love swallowing objects. And it looks like we need something called fire. Fire? What that? Oh, it like air, but when angry. Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
you mean bad touch. Excellent. And we also need candy for every soldier. Wait, this ink is fresh. Who wrote this?
Huh.
Maybe it's a new update. While being invaded by the local superpower with a military influenced by one of the most legendary generals of all time was a less than ideal way to celebrate a new promotion, Goizhan was nonetheless determined to resist. But fighting such a renowned military required some cunning. It required some wit. It required a cutthroat mentality. Wait, that's it! Taking my advice a bit too literally, in one battle, Goizhan, quote, sent 3 waves of convicted criminals toward the Wu front lines, where, with a great shout, they proceeded to cut their own throats. Now, different sources claim that they were actually soldiers willing to die instead of criminals, but either way, the goal here, other than giving me content, was to leave the Wu forces stupefied and intimidated.
Yeah, I mean, look, using intimidation tactics, that's not a bad thing, but that's a pretty crazy intimidation tactic. You're taking, well, I mean, look, I wouldn't suggest this either way, but especially if it's your own soldiers, you're taking your own soldiers who could potentially be fighting men and having them kill themselves in front of the enemy. I mean, even if it's convicted criminals, that's a pretty crazy tactic to use. And I don't know, I'm not sure. Maybe that could be intimidating to the enemy, but I also feel like if you've been fighting, you've been involved in warfare, you've seen plenty of death, I'm not sure how intimidating this would actually be. Perhaps it would be. Perhaps it would be pretty horrifying, but pretty strange overall, I have to say.
However, I can see this plan easily backfiring.
That's right! We're fucking crazy! You better surrender!
Holy
Also, this is like at the end of Monty Python's Life of Brian, where I forget what it's called, but they have the Suicide Squad come to save Brian, and they show up, and instead of fighting the Roman soldiers, they just all kill themselves. That's what this is reminding me of. By the way, if you haven't seen Life of Brian, watch it. A fantastic Monty Python movie.
shit, sir, I don't think I could fight them. This is insane. Hold on, Corporal, just hold on. What's a corporal? Oh my god, that's insane!
Haha, that it is!
Could you imagine how scary it would be if they did that again?
That's right! We're demented! B Squadron, show 'em!
Oh, the humanity! What eldritch horrors awaits if these demons were to descend upon us?
Horror indeed!
I just might surrender if they did that yet again.
Right! Fuck. Squadron C, show these men before the eyes of our gods what we're capable of!
Oh, God.
Sweet heavens! My men are truly cowering in fear.
As they should!
Now, if they were to show us yet another time, but unfortunately for them, the art of war didn't cover what to do if the enemy soldiers fucking killed themselves.
Yeah.
So when the UA forces launched a surprise attack from another direction, the stunned soldiers were promptly defeated. As with
Wow.
all ancient history, a certain amount of faith is required when learning about its stories. However, I'm more inclined to believe this tale, as its sources are often considered some of the most trustworthy in ancient history, and the tale is recounted by sinology experts today. Cutting
Oh, bro's bringing out the sources, huh?
one's throat was a rather common way to commit suicide after all, and because death was viewed quite differently around this time, the soldiers may have believed their sacrifice would be rewarded in the afterlife. And if they had been criminals, some theorize their families may have been threatened to ensure their compliance. And you know, not like run over to the other side. I spent a lot of time tracking down, verifying, and independently translating various sources. Shout out to Kevin's dad. So if any YouTubers are looking to make some content, I hope they are satisfied with this disclosure.
Sheesh, okay. Well, back to the racism thumbnail.
That
Well, I mean, look, I gave that disclaimer earlier, right? And then this situation where I am not an expert on Chinese history, especially not this era, so I don't have the knowledge off the top of my head, but if you're someone who's interested, you should always feel free to dig into the sources that have been used, actually read them. Like I said, I tend to take everything with a grain of salt regardless, but this is why it's good to show the sources and pieces of information that you used so people can actually track them down and fact check you and see if you've misinterpreted anything so you don't end up in a racism question mark thumbnail.
was a joke, by the way. As for the defeated King Helu, he was mortally wounded in the Battle of the Deep Throat. Cuts. But lived long enough to tell his son and soon-to-be king to never forget about Yue. And so, holding his dying father's hand, his son made a vow. He was never gonna give Yue up, never gonna let Yue down. Jumping forward 100 years, we have the Persian Empire at the top of their game.
Hey.
They've been balling around the peasants of the Fertile Crescent and are now the largest empire by any assessment. With the recovery of Egypt, an economy full of riches, the future was looking bright for little old Persia's business.
For now.
You know, so long as a Greek boy with a city
Yeah.
naming habit doesn't come along.
I was gonna say, we've got the Persians have reached a real height. That height will not last, but they'll reach heights again in the future with the Parthians and the Sassanids and all that good stuff. But, you know, each Persian empire can only last so long before it must be inevitably brought down.
334 BC, and the Persian Empire is being invaded by a man so legendary, so monumental, that his world-altering conquest and exploits would forever land him with the name Alexander the Great. That is, unless you subscribe to my theory. Yeah, I don't know, he's weirdly close with that cavalry commander. Probably not the only saddle he's riding. Call me crazy, but I just don't think Alexander is straight. What was that? Duh, I was just saying that Alexander is great. What's going on over here, babe? Alex. Ah, Hephaestion. Finished getting that city named after me? Which one? Alexandria, or Alexandria?
Oh.
Alexandria. Oh, yes, paperwork's been submitted. Excellent. Oh, hey, Alexander the Great. Make sure to write that one down. A few years in, and Alexander's been slapping around Darius pretty good. And after taking over modern-day Turkey, it was time to plan their next move. Alright, that was a great victory. Now for diplomacy. Go further east, that's a fantastic idea. No, sir, should we not engage the Persians in negotiations so as to not overextend ourselves and risk hemorrhaging our forces against the largest empire known to man? Oh, my sweet Clythius. No.
Who do you think you're talking to, brother? You're talking to Alexander the Great. This man would not stop until the end when he was stopped by his death. But this man would continue to expand as far as possible. There was no diplomacy for him, right? And of course, for Alexander, a big chunk of his conquests were just conquering the Persian Empire. Of course, he did conquer territory outside of the Persian Empire, but really his greatest achievement is just taking over that entire empire. And of course, while he was going, he took on many Persian customs, a lot of the culture of the empire, in some ways adapting to the new peoples he was conquering. But yeah, he was not one really for compromise or diplomacy. He was going to take what he wanted.
Alexander was determined to push further east, conquering the whole of Persia. But first, he knew he had to secure his supply lines from the danger of the Persian navy, making him the second military mastermind in history to uncover the divine wisdom, soldiers need food. And to achieve this security...
Hey, once again, I'm going to let you know, that's an important thing to remember. Because logistics, for some they may be the less interesting side of warfare, maybe not as exciting, but it is just as important to have good logistics as to, have a good fighting force, right? You need to keep them fed. And logistics is something that has been overlooked by many headstrong generals throughout history, right? Either you need to be concerned with logistics, or you need a logistics guy. This is how it often happens. You have someone by your side, a lieutenant, a right-hand man, who is concerned with maintaining supply lines and logistics. And like I said, many different military leaders have said, yeah, you know what, screw the logistics. And sometimes, if you're brilliant, like Julius Caesar, it can work out, sure. But oftentimes it does not, and you're left stranded in enemy territory with no food. I mean, how many times has that happened throughout history? Many, many, many times. That's why it's important that Sun Tzu lays out the basics, right? Because people often do not remember those basics.
And control the Mediterranean, the city of Tyre needed to fall. There was just one small problem with that, though. Alright, Tyre should be right around here. Oh. Looks like it's an island, sir. But what if it wasn't? What? Without a strong enough navy of his own, Alexander decided that peninsulas were in fashion and ordered his men to throw fuckloads of rocks in the water to build a land bridge all the way to the fortified island of Tyre.
Wow.
However, this would be no easy project. The island was supported by a navy, surrounded by lofty walls, and was a whole kilometer off the coast. But impregnable wasn't a word Alexander liked hearing. This will be a monumental task, not to mention the city is near impregnable. Hey, I have no problem impregnating. I'm the king of Macedonia after all. Right. So anyway, if we want this to work, we're gonna have to figure out how to get it up. Who told you that? That was one time, Clythius. Is Mary running that bitch mouth again? No, sir, I'm sorry. Please, don't be too hard on me. I have no problem getting hard. Call him Alexander Deflate. What was that? I said you're Alexander the Great. You have a magnificent cock, sir. Now, chucking enough rocks in the ocean to build a causeway wide enough to shove multiple siege towers out towards our great Lord Cthulhu is quite the exhausting task.
I was gonna say, you don't just have to build a land bridge out, you need a land bridge big enough that you can actually besiege a city. So either you need a bridge big enough to bring siege towers, or even then, usually when you're besieging a city, it'll involve encircling the city. Well, you're probably not going to be able to do that unless you build a whole land circle around the city, but yeah, that's, although I guess it depends if the walls are literally right at the edges of the island or if there's a bit more land around. Either way, that's a pretty large land bridge to build, especially if you're under assault by the enemy while you do it.
But luckily for Alexander, there were plenty of local hands perfectly capable of carrying rocks nearby, and they were just too excited to help.
Right.
All that's needed now is a bountiful supply of rocks. Well, these aren't being used. The Tyrians saw them toiling away, planting rocks and sticks in the water, and decided to help out by supplying some of their own. And while I'm sure the gesture was appreciated, their aid had the unfortunate side effect of spray painting the bridge red. Alexander, not vibing with this design direction, built a palisade to protect the workers, along with 2 siege towers at the end of the bridge. However, the Tyrians, much like George Bush, were determined to destroy the 2 towers, so they stuffed a few ships with incendiary materials and crashed them into the structures, burning them to the ground. But Alexander was rather skeptical of this. Triremes can't melt wooden beams after all, so he decided to build yet another, even wider causeway from a second location on the mainland.
Yeah, so I guess you've got some land surrounding the walls, so once you get over there, maybe you can pour your soldiers on and start to surround the place. Though, of course, yeah, I mean, this is a pretty crazy plan overall. You've got, if you're Alexander's men, well, I guess 2 ways in and out. You gotta go back over these land bridges that you've built.
Shouldn't he? I mean, the volunteers are practically boiling with excitement after all. Surely he couldn't fail this time. We are talking about the mastermind that solved the Gordian knot. So this is the Gordian knot? It's impossible to untie. Oh, impossible, you say? Yeah, it has to be. It's holding a suspended load of concrete over an orphanage. So you're saying it'd take a true hero to untie it, huh? No, ideally it should not be messed with. Oh, sweet Jesus! Yeah, Aristotle was my teacher. But a bridge wasn't going to be enough.
Okay, aside from the concrete over the orphanage, I do like how all these ancient tales, you know, they're not so interested in fact, but what they are interested, what the ancient historians were interested, was in communicating something to us, right? So what does that tell us about Alexander, presented with this complicated issue, the knots that no one had been able to solve? He took the issue straight up and just sliced through it. Right, that really tells us what kind of guy he was. As we talked about earlier, he was not one for compromise or diplomacy or to overthink things. No, he would charge forward, conquering everything in front of him. Right, so all of these ancient tales, you know, a lot of them, you know, may have a shaky historical basis. Depending on what you're looking at, you can be looking at pure mythology, something that is maybe more plausible that just is still made up, or maybe something that just has shaky evidence. But what you can get from these ancient historians is the sort of message, the lesson, or whatever they're trying to teach you through the story. There's usually something like that.
On its own, Alexander needed ships, lots of them, and luckily for him, he had just captured a bunch of Phoenician cities with naval fleets just sitting around collecting dust when they could be collecting skulls. So he rounded them up and brought them to the island. The siege dragged on, the Macedonians slaving away with naval protection, while the Tyrians provided them some public theater with volunteers from the audience. Things would eventually come to an end when the Macedonians overwhelmed the Tyrians by attacking from both man-made land and sea. And finally, after the great Alexander gloriously conquered the city, cementing yet another story in his legacy that would sculpt the cultural transcending legend of a truly magnificent man, he was able to stand tall atop his prize. And sell the women and children to slavery, crucifying 2,000 of the few surviving men. As they say, another epic victory for the OG. Who says that? It'll catch on, you'll see. Well, you won't see. You'll be very dead. Only the citizens taking shelter in a temple were spared, including the king of Tyre himself. As for Alexander's 7-month rock stacking project, the remains of it are still visible, and centuries of sand accumulation have terraformed the island of Tyre into the peninsula of Tyre, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world that you could still visit to this day. Well, maybe hold off for now. We remember the Cold Wars, that funny half-century period where 2 halves of the world edged each other to see who would splooge plutonium first. But while today we know both sides ended up being true long-lasting kings, the Brits of the 1950s weren't so sure and needed to develop some contingency plans in case the hammer and sickle came a-knockin'. But how does
Yeah, well, you've got Britain in the 1950s. We're talking immediately after the end of the Second World War. This was a Britain that was seeing its colonial empire slowly, well, actually pretty quickly, dissolve in front of it, and a Britain that was having to get used to the idea that they were no longer the global empire, and that there were 2 new big dogs in the neighborhood, aka the USSR and the US, a UK that was facing the fact they were increasingly unimportant in global affairs, and so they had to be ready to deal with any situation that would occur.
stopped the LeBron of steamrolling through Eastern Europe from doing just that. Well, luckily, the puzzle of keeping big groups of people out of big chunks of area while
And of course, at this point, this is the beginning of the Cold War. As we know, it's this conflict that lasted for decades that never evolved into hot war between the US and the Soviets, but led to a bunch of these proxy wars around the world. But at the time, that was not clear, right? I think a lot of people felt, especially after the Second World War, that what was going to happen was another one, that the US and the USSR would break out into all-out warfare that would perhaps end the world with the advent of the nuclear weapon, right? So people really, they were worried for good reason, and they had to be ready.
just that. Well, luckily, the puzzle of keeping big groups of people out of big chunks of area while also assisting with Hell's underpopulation problem had already been solved. Landmines. Only problem was, landmines were kind of lacking pizzazz. That was last decade's fashion after all, so how does one jazz up this concept with a taste of the 1950s trends? Introducing Operation Blue Peacock, which was renamed from Blue Bunny, which was renamed from Brown Bunny. Really doing everything they can to avoid a Warner Bros. Lawsuit. Blue Peacock was a project to develop a nuclear landmine with the goal of putting the first Soviet man into orbit. The plan was to bury a bunch of these in an area so uninhabitable and undesirable that nobody would mind it getting destroyed and irradiated. You know, somewhere like Germany. This way, if the Soviets were to invade the Iron Curtain, their advance would be halted in their tracks with some atomic confetti.
That's a crazy idea. It's not even, like, look, with nuclear weapons, you gotta make the decision in the moment to send them, which is a decision that has not been made yet. It almost was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but they decided not to. This is a literal landmine that just, hey, if you hit it, it'll explode. And along with exploding, it's going to take most of West and East Germany with it. Well, maybe not that much, but wherever it was placed, it's going to take the surrounding area with it. And of course, the radiation will impact a much wider area, so that's crazy.
Getting the area in enough radioactive fallout to prevent enemy occupation. This 10 kiloton nuke weighing 7,300 kilograms would be buried 35 feet deep and blast a crater 640 feet across. To help visualize, that is a bomb weighing 780,302.73 gumballs with a 100 billion gumball yield, buried 420 gumballs deep and exploding a 7,680 gumball wide crater. With how big these puppies were, you weren't exactly able to litter a whole minefield with them, so they had to choose their locations very strategically. Alright Vlad, it was a good day one, but I'm thinking we set up supply depot before pushing on. This looks like a good spot, so let's—
Hey! A little more to the right!
Of course, these landmines couldn't be pressure activated, not unless we wanted some kid playing hopscotch to step on a crack and break the sound barrier. So instead, they were designed to be detonated either by wire or by an 8-day timer. And to prevent anyone from being too nosy—
This whole idea is horrible. Okay? Of course it won't be pressure activated. I think I suggested that earlier. Obviously it won't be pressure activated, but either having it on a timer or on a wire is also crazy. I mean, this is just a crazy idea. Really, most ideas surrounding nuclear weapons are pretty crazy, you know? Just because the possibility is that you'll start a nuclear conflict that will literally end the world, or at least end most life on the world, right? So really any type of idea is a pretty insane one involving nuclear weapons.
Detonate if it was tampered with by any passing Russian soldier and or curious child. There was just one problem with this plan. With the bomb being 35 feet deep in German soil, cold winter temperatures would prevent the electronics from working properly. So those lab boys back in the UK had to come up with an idea so ingenious, so brilliant, that they could keep their bomb internals safely warm for 8 whole days in the field until detonation. Congratulations on your new appointment, Dr. Pekka. Our team couldn't have selected anyone better. I'm just happy to be given the opportunity. After 8 long years of higher education, I'm excited to finally be able to pay off my loans and provide for my wife and eggs back home. The job market is tough for my kind, as you can imagine. Well, I can assure you we don't discriminate here at Fort Halstead. We only pick the best candidates for the job. I'm glad to hear that. So, where's my office?
Bro, the accents are so bad, man.
Oh, just right in here. The Brits' genius idea was to stuff a live chicken in a nuclear landmine to keep it warm with good old-fashioned body heat.
Okay, a couple of things. How are you going to keep that chicken alive? I'm sure they had a way to keep it alive, right? And then secondly, would that be enough heat? And if the body heat of a chicken was enough, can't you figure out something else, like a heater or something? That doesn't feel like that much heat to me. Did it really need to be a chicken? A live chicken?
Plan to give it enough food to prevent it from pecking at wires and keeping it alive for at least 8 days before it was sent to the Shadow Realm.
Oh,
Surely
right.
a device only
I
conceivable
guess it doesn't have to be alive for that long.
by the West, as pumping a KFC meal full of the entire electromagnetic spectrum is nothing more than the final evolution of ultra-processed meat. So
That chicken will become the Hulk. That will be our next superhero.
with 2 prototypes built and 10 orders in the horizon, all that was left was to put their cock-filled plan into motion. Yeah, so we'll just kind of spread them out around here. Ben, will this be a problem? Only if you're invested in local real estate. No, they'll be quite dead. The Brits chickened out of the project once they remembered that nuclear fallout was famously unpredictable and could drift towards what I guess you could refer to as people. Blue Peacock was kept secret until it was declassified
Yeah, it could drift much further than that, man.
April 1st, 2004, leading many to believe that shoving a Popeyes combo in a nuke had to be an April Fool's joke, to which the head of education at the National Archives responded, "The civil service does not do jokes."
Huh, that's funny. Yeah, I like to see some crazy plots from the Brits, because when we talk about the 20th century, especially the mid to late 20th century, everyone's looking at America, looking at the CIA, especially the FBI as well, but really the CIA. All the crazy plots they were getting up to. But hey, reminder, other people did it too. This is the Brits sort of on the tail end of their era of wacky world-conquering plots, since, like I said, they were declining in importance at that point, but they still had a couple of strange ideas left in them.
While trashing a project that spent 4 years in development sounds like a complete waste of time, they did find a way to salvage this at the end of the day. All that hard work designing and developing a wacky weapon prototype would end up fueling Britain's other favorite hobby: filling museum basements. Wacky War Tactics Part 3, 8.1452 out of 10 stars.
Wow, okay. Your man rated his own video. Well, there we go. Wacky War Tactics Part 3. As always, we got some pretty wacky strategies for fighting warfare. If you guys enjoyed this one, you can leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. I hope you guys all enjoyed this one. Hope you're all having a fantastic day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.